Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Not necessarily like a conversation, though it probably should have been. It was more of a this thing is now like the biggest thing that we're doing and necessitates sort of like the attention that it needs. And we did do a couple of big ones afterwards, but really like the TTRPG stuff sort of like had a gravity of its own, and because it was like a new project and it needed like attention in terms of like getting it over the finish line, and because it was like our first TTRPG product, we really wanted to make sure that, you know, we gave it everything we had.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
This is Lee.
And this is Pat.
And we're Diesel Shot. And when we're not making games, you will find us listening to Tabletop Talk and fucking up the tape.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Ray Chou. Ray Chou is a Los Angeles-based writer, publisher, and educator with a passion for creating original worlds and uplifting the next generation. As a writer, Ray is a passionate storyteller with works primarily in comic sequential art. Through his company Mythworks, Ray is one of the pioneers of crowd-funded comics. Today, he's the co-founder of Mythworks. We've featured many of their games and designs here on the show, as well as talked to many of their designers, including Emma Costa, Mikey Ham, and Renee Pierre. Ray, welcome to the third floor.
Thanks, Greg, for having me.
So before we kind of jump into your origin story, Ray, this has been happening to me a lot lately, which is somebody like, and just most recently with Emma Costa, right? So M comes up on my radar. I think it was Exiles, the crowdfunding for that. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. And I start digging into other things that M is making. I'm like, I own like 7 of their books or books that they've contributed to. And you and I get talking and I'm like, I know I've been like following Mythworks for a while and stuff. I go to my bookshelf and I've got just books and books and books created by you guys. And it's very funny to me how somebody can come onto my radar and then I already own like half their work already. But I, Ray, must ask you the stupid question that every stupid podcaster asks you when you come on their show, which is at some point you knew nothing about this hobby. And then you came across it for the first time. Can you take me back to that moment?
Yeah, so my origins in role-playing actually derive from a game called StarCraft, which
nice.
Came out in, I think, like 1998 or something like that. So I think I played it in the first or second year. So I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I was one of the early adopters for online play. My parents banned TV. I couldn't watch TV on the weekdays at my home, but for some reason the internet and the computer was unregulated, right? So that was the big hack.
Beating the shit out of with Bugs and Marines was okay. We just can't watch TV.
Absolutely, yeah. So I love this game called StarCraft, but I was not very good at it. I've never been very good at competitive games, but I've always loved games, and I was drawn to a game mode called Use Map Settings. And Use Map Settings is when you make a custom map and you use triggers using the map editor that's built into the game to essentially code different genres or different mods of the games. So that's where things like tower defense and Dota came from. And one of the games that was on there was a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, what is Dungeons and Dragons? So I started playing these games, and essentially one player would control everything and would be called the Dungeon Master, and they would spawn different enemies for the other players to fight, and the other players would choose one of the hero characters that were classes, and essentially you would roleplay by typing into the chat and just playing that way. So I got really, really into it, and there were a couple of other Use Map Settings maps Tabletop's like a Legends open role-playing game where essentially you could just spawn any units you wanted and you could role-play as different kingdoms. And I think that was my first introduction to role-playing as a whole. And my path to tabletop continued through computer games. So I later played Baldur's Gate 2, and I think that was maybe my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons proper. And it's highly anticipated sort of spiritual successor, Neverwinter Nights, and that was 2001, I think. So the summer before. Either before my freshman year or before 8th grade. And I remember being really excited about Neverwinter Nights and being really excited specifically because it was a game designed for online Dungeons & Dragons play. And I was super hyped about that. So I bought that game on release, immediately jumped into the online communities, joined a table, basically one of the first recurring campaigns of that game. And it was kind of a mix between like a in-person house game and like an MMO, because essentially the GM would not only GM the game, but they would build out the entire module and the entire world, again using the game's built-in map editor and GM tools. And so I played in that campaign for that summer, all of that summer, so for about 4 months. And then in my sophomore year, I think, Wizards of the Coast decided to get rid of their retail presence. So they decided to close the Wizards of the Coast stores, and more notably for me, living in Arcadia, California with the San Anita Mall, the local gamekeeper. And I had been playing Warhammer 40k for a couple of years at that point, so I was familiar with Gamekeeper, and they were going out of business, and everything in their store was going on massive sale. So I got the 3.5, the core set for I think like 50 or 60% off, and I was super excited. To this day, one of my best sales finds ever. So knowing what Dungeons and Dragons was through Neverwinter Nights and earlier StarCraft, I got my friends together and basically told them, hey, like, let's do this. I'll DM, and then we started playing, and then I played, all through high school essentially, and then kind of stopped in college, as a lot of people do when 4th edition came out. And I picked it back up again once I graduated, and everybody, this was maybe 2012, I think, 2011, and a lot of my friends were also in similar positions where we had moved back home, and I thought, hey, let's pick up TTRPGs again. So at that point, I think I went to my local friendly game shop, and I asked him, hey, like, I want to pick up Dungeons and Dragons again. He's like, Dungeons and Dragons, nobody plays that game anymore. It's all about Pathfinder now. So
at that time, they weren't lying to you.
Yeah,
Isn't that funny?
It was kind of insane. So picked up Pathfinder, which is very similar to 3.5, and played that for a couple of years again. And then I got really serious into writing and publishing comics, and I found that the amount of prep that I was doing was kind of counterintuitive to my other creative pursuits, because it was drawing from the same well. So I had to tell my players, like, hey, I know we've been doing this for a little while, but I think we need to stop, because I really want to focus on my comic stuff. And ironically enough, when we released our first comic series, we worked with a cartographer named Joseph Vandal, a German cartographer, and he was also a graphic designer, and he had done a lot of the maps and other kind of errata for Blades in the Dark. So he told me about Blades in the Dark before the Kickstarter was happening. He showed me, I think, Quick Start 5 or 6, and, I was like, oh, yeah, well, I played Dungeons & Dragons before. I know what tabletop role-playing is. And he's like, no, you have to check this out. Like, you have to read this. So I read it, and my mind was absolutely blown. I just was, the idea of this sort of fiction-first engine, and the idea of the rules supporting the generation of the story completely blew my mind open.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand it, to be honest, or I didn't fully grok it. I tried running a session with my writing partner, Vince, at the time, and I got hung up on the mixed success. So, like, I ran the opening scenario with Bazo Baz, and he was like, well, I'm gonna try and fight this guy. I'm gonna try and punch my way out of it. And like pretty soon we hit a brick wall with the mixed success, and it was kind of it was was a funny experience because my partner had never played role-playing games growing up before, so I was simultaneously trying to explain to him what a tabletop role-playing game was and also why Blades was different, and I was getting very excited and trying to get caught up with it. But anyway, it was compelling enough where I knew that this was something that, like, just from a design, artistic, being into tabletop games, that I knew like I wanted to learn more about it and explore more of it. So we kind of said to each other, like, okay, we'll explore this. We'll try and make games out of our comic series, and that was sort of from the years of around, I don't know, about 2014 to around 2019. So what would happen was we every 6 months or so, I would sort of go back to Blades and I would read it again, and I would try to understand it, and I would begin hacking it, like a lot of people do, just sort of by rewriting the rules with my own rule set. But the problem was I had never played it, and I knew that there was a blockage in my understanding of how the rules worked. So I would try and go online, or try not just online but in person. I would try to find people to play this game with. And I live in Los Angeles. I live in a major city, and at the time there was at least nobody I could find that was actually like playing this game publicly. And I would check. I would go to my friendly local game store. I would go online. I would try to do all these things, and I could just never kind of get it going. So I would dip it in and out of the Google Plus. I would watch sort of like John Harper's, like, his interviews about how to hack Blades, and I would engage in the community here and there. And this happened for a couple of years, where I would pick it up for a week or two of manic work and then sort of drop it again and get busy. And then in 2019, towards the end of it, I was like, okay, this is the year. 2020 is going to be the year that we really do this. So towards the end of 2019, I think around November is when I started really seriously getting into it again. And then, of course, COVID happened. So that gave me and my partner and everyone else lots and lots of time. And I became really, really involved with the Blades in the Dark Discord. And that's where I met that's where I met Mikey. That's where I met Emmanuel. That I started talking about hacking Blades with other fellow hackers. I started helping them organize their charity stuff, their podcasts and whatnot. And I got really, really involved in that community. And right before the pandemic shut everything down too, I did find a meetup group, Story Games Glendale, now Story Games LA, and I met up with them in February. They met like every other Monday or every other Tuesday back then. So I met that group of people, and they were running games like Blades, like Powered by the Apocalypse, like The Quiet Year. So I was like, oh, finally there's like an indie RPG meetup that I had been looking for years and years and years. So started hanging out with them. They moved online during the pandemic as well, and those were kind of like my two communities during the pandemic years, and got really, really active in designing it, studying Blade, studying other systems, playing in a lot of play tests, making like little micro story games, and that kind of led to everything else.
I've got tons of questions, so buckle up.
Yep.
Let's go back to your transition. So you find role playing through the computer, and through a game that's designed to try to take the tabletop experience and bring it online, but you kind of flip that on its head. You started with Neverwinds and then ended up migrating to the tabletop version of it. So I guess my first question is what was that transition like? Did it seem foreign? Did it seem like, oh, I wish I was doing this the whole time, or this is just different? Like, what was it like to go from Neverwinds to actually sitting at a table and playing?
Well, I was kind of a nervy teenager, a little socially awkward, chronically online. I think, again, early adapter, right? Like my dad was a big computer nerd, so we got 14.4K and 28.8K, like, and then DSL later, like pretty early, especially in our area. So I was always comfortable being online, and I was always in like chat rooms, kind of grew up in chat rooms, grew up on Battle.net, grew up in different like online games and playing online games. So playing online was like very, very natural for me, and very and one thing about playing online, I think, was that you could interact with people much older than you, and they would not necessarily know because you were just typing through the chat. So I kind of got welcomed into very various like online communities at like a very young age. So I think playing online that campaign during the summer like was very, very pivotal because I felt like I created so many memories with the people that I played with and the various characters. Like we really were co-authoring this entire world, and I think that really opened my eyes as to like the possibility of what this role-playing thing could be. And then transitioning back into the real world, it was really more with my friends. So in a way, it was kind of like me selling them on this idea. Like some of them had heard of role-playing before, maybe even tried it, or their older siblings had tried it, but I was sort of like the one to sort of lead the charge for like my group of friends, my cohort, to really do it. And then it kind of became like one of my central kind of like social activities, like, gotcha. and that was really fun. Like I would host or me or my friend would host like, epic like weekend sleepovers where we would play for like, 9-10 hours every day, and then like take a break to like order pizza and like watch a movie and then keep playing, and like those were like some of the best times like I've ever had. So it was a pretty natural transition overall. I think playing online, especially like with the voice with the typing at that time, people took the online game very seriously. So like there was like kind of a deep immersive level of role play that was happening that I would say like not necessarily the same when playing with a bunch of teenagers, where it gets kind of silly, right? People especially during everyone's first role-playing experience, a lot of like murder hoboing and a lot of like pushing the boundaries and seeing like what you could do, but playing with your friends in person at that age, I think is like is so unforgettable and so formative. So like both very, very different experiences. But yeah, like I think it was a pretty, it gave me the confidence, I think, to be able to be like, what, I can dungeon master. I know what this is, at least from like the online setting, and I can bring this to my friends. And I think it lowered or it smoothed that barrier of entry for me.
So speaking of League of Legends, it sounds like there was also another alley that was in place here too, and that was the comic books. So can we jump over there real quick and kind of give me an idea? When did you get into sequential art? Were you first an artist, then a writer, then both? Or can you give me a little bit of idea of that trajectory?
Yeah. Also, let's see. When did I get? So my path through comics started at the library, believe it or not. So my local public library had a pretty robust collection of graphic novel collections. So I would go and I would just consume lots and lots and lots of graphic novels. And funny enough, this same public library also had a subscription to Dungeon and Dragon, and I'm pretty sure it was the same librarian, right? So there's definitely like this link between like nerddom, geekdom, and like librarians, which is kind of funny, and like we can revisit that because I went to American Library Association last year, and those roots really, really go deep.
That's great.
So I read a bunch of trades at that local library, and that eventually turned into me like wanting sort of the newer stuff. So I really got into comics in high school as well, and also I had been reading manga online, and just in general, like I was a pretty nerdy kid, and I'm sure a lot of people reading this or listening to this can relate. But I was into video games. I was into wargaming through Warhammer 40K. Dungeons and Dragons, manga, and then like comics, and specifically I got into film school. So I'm actually not an artist. I consider myself, my training is more as a filmmaker. So in high school, I had a really, really good English teacher who encouraged my creative side, and she encouraged me to pursue a career in the arts, Mrs. Swift, my AP English teacher. And so I decided to apply to film school. And that was one of the moments in my life where I first really applied myself, I would say, where I was like, okay, I have a goal and I really, really want to reach for this goal. So I worked really hard to get into a good film school. I got into NYU Film. And when I got there, I met my business partner Vince, my creative and business partner, and we bonded because we were pretty geeky, and believe it or not, like I tell this story and people were like, there are no geeks in film school. There were, but at NYU it was more like the Scorsese geeks and the Kubrick geeks and the art house geeks and hipsters, and I certainly loved all of that stuff. But me and Vince bonded over Lord of the Rings, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, Star Wars, stuff like that. So, we kind of developed a friendship. We crewed on each other's films and our friends' films a lot. And afterwards, we stayed in touch, and we became kind of writing partners or writing buddies. So we would exchange scripts back and forth. And he moved to London, and I moved back home to Los Angeles. And eventually, we began co-writing on scripts together. And I did a couple passes on his sort of film school baby, Skies of Fire, which was this diesel punk airship story. And eventually, we did like 5 or 6 drafts of that together, and we thought it was pretty good. But like clearly, our vision or our scope was more in the summer blockbuster, the kind of like J.J. Abrams Star Trek level of experience. And being, recent grads at 22, 23 years old, we were like, well, how are we going to ever make this into a film? And so I had the bright idea to turn it into a comic book. And I thought, hey, we could do that. I looked into it. It was not dissimilar from my education, and I kind of specialized in producing as a student producer in film school. So I kind of learned and knew how to put together a budget, a schedule, how to bring teams together. And I was like, hey, I think we can do this. I think we just gotta look for artists and then sort of figure that out. So we found an artist, Pablo Pepino. We did the first 5 pages. Spent a lot of time doing that. It felt very scary. I think we both put in maybe like $1,200 a piece at the time, and that felt like a ton of. It still is a lot of money, but like at 22, 20,
age,
it was like a lot of money. And then we were going to submit it to various publishing companies, and looked into that, but then also looked into crowdfunding. And we were also early adopters for crowdfunding because we went to school in NYU. Kickstarter was founded in Brooklyn in 2008.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so 2008 we were juniors at the time. So literally it was built for filmmakers essentially. So the NYU kids were like one of the first early adopters. So our friends, our cohorts were early adopters onto the platform. So my account was very, very old, and I had been backing stuff since like 2008, 2009. Looked back on it, and this was like 2012, 2013. Saw that there was sort of this thriving scene of comics as well, and I thought, hey, looking at some of the examples here, is like, we could do this. Like, this is not unlike a film prospectus, which is not unlike a business plan, and I knew how to do one of those. And so I told Vince, I was like, I think we can do this, and I don't think this will close any other doors for us if we do want to publish it down the line, and maybe we can just sort of treat it like a film project and see how we do. So the plan was to do like the first issue, and at the time Comixology was the big hot platform. They don't even exist anymore, which is kind of funny. How
I didn't realize that they had closed that down. Oh, shit.
Yeah, I think they still exist as like an imprint of Amazon, but as far as their online platform, it's completely gone now. Nowadays it's Global Comics with the X is the big one that's out there. But our big master plan was essentially make the first issue, go digital on Comixology, and profit. that was it. That was the extent of like our vision.
Tens of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. So we launched the Kickstarter, and people really liked it, and we got $15,000 thereabouts, and like 500 backers on that first project. And again, one of those pivotal moments where it felt like we were doing something with our lives for the first time, right? We're like, wow, we can really do this, and that got us enough to not just do the first issue, but enough to fund the second issue and do a print run of about 1,000 and go to New York Comic Con for the first time. So we did New York Comic Con in 2014. That was our first con, and just sort of continued on that crowdfunding, self-publishing model, and we're very much like kind of early adopters / and dare I say like pioneers of that model, because we were one of the first original comic series on there that would continue. So usually back then it was either a web comic that had been syndicated for quite a while, and they would do a hardcover or soft cover of like 100, 200, 300 pages, and they already had their fan base, so that they would bring to the platform. Like Order of the Stick is a really good example of that, like one of the big early successes of Kickstarter comics and crowdfunding in general. Or they would be a really ambitious project and try and do an entire original graphic novel of like 100 pages, and a lot of those projects managed to fundraise, like at the time 20, 30K, but then they would crash and burn because comics are extremely difficult to make, and it's just sort of overscoped and overambitious. So we did the first one. We didn't really think about doing the second issue even on comics, and in fact we were at some point like, well, we have the second issue now. What do we do with it? It didn't even cross our mind to go back to crowdfunding until I talked to another creator, Madeline Rosling, who does Boston Metaphysical, and she's also a local LA creator. We were at like, I think, Long Beach Comic Con or something, and she kind of like looked at me like, well, Ray, why don't you just go back on Kickstarter? And I thought, oh, there's an idea. Like, why don't we do that? So we did, and the second one was even more successful than the first. And
isn't that something?
Yeah, and because nobody had done it, right? Nobody had done like a second issue on Kickstarter, so I didn't think it was possible. So like that's why I say, like, I guess we were one of the early pioneers to sort of do that and to prove that was maybe viable. And so yeah, we started making comics on Kickstarter, and then that was enough to sort of fund a little side hustle / hobby / passion project for me and Vince. And eventually in 2020, that year, I think towards the end of that year, we ended up doing the crowdfunder for the Wildsea as well, and that was our first publishing project. So not only like first TTRPG, but first project that wasn't Vince and I's like origination or creation as well.
So what I'm hearing, Ray, is, so we talked about role-playing games, the fact that you were pushed into the DM position pretty early on because you were, as often is the case, right? When you're the ambassador trying to introduce this hobby, you end up being the guy behind the screen. Then we've got the comic books, and then we've got the film stuff. Like, it's all storyteller to me. That's what I keep hearing when I talked about these three different tranches. Where does that come from, right? So now as you're older and you look back at those three different paths you were down that crossed over a good bit and intertwined a good bit, like, what is that drive that you have to like get stories out of your head?
Yeah, I think it starts very young. I was left to my own devices quite a lot as a kid, and I remember jumping around on the couches in the living room, doing like spaceman spiff stuff, right? Like just sort of like pretending like I was like an astronaut, or like thanks, like a Power Ranger. And going back to like meeting Vince, I realized I'm not a single child. I have an older sister, but I was left alone quite a lot. Both my parents worked, and Vince is a single child, and like I realized that he kind of had a similar upbringing where like we both were kids that really, really lived in our imaginations and really just sort of like found comfort in the fantastical worlds that we came up with. I was always like a sandbox kid, right? In the playground, I would love building castles and like building like forts and stuff with other people, and like making up stories about like the armies and the kingdoms and whatnot. Kind of playing house and like role playing and doing that stuff rather than playing like punch ball or basketball on the recess field. And then kind of going back to the video game stuff, I think one of my skills too, besides storytelling, is like pattern recognition. Like because like I was never like necessarily like the best at anything, but I always picked up on stuff very quickly, and I always was sort of like an early adopter for stuff. Like I was early to the internet. I was early to like online gaming, and I would always like pick games or things that ended up like kind of blowing up later, whether it was like StarCraft or like I remember in 5th grade I played like Counter-Strike, like when it was in beta beta like 5 or something like that, and then later, a couple 3 or 4 years down the line, it became like the biggest game in the entire
only
world.
Game anybody played.
Right. And this was like when I first played, this was me like learning at the age of like 11 how to like mod Half-Life and like figure out how to like install stuff like that. So I've always been sort of like early to stuff, and I think I've been good at like identifying like kind of those patterns. So always loved imagining. My comfort zone was definitely like playing in my own worlds, my own head. Had this love for reading, a love for media, like growing up, like read tons and tons of books, read tons and tons of manga, tons and tons of comics, and then like this love for film, and DM'd, and that was a big part of my core identity as a teenager. So just like it all sort of like coalesced. I think in like second grade too, like I told my parents, I was like, I want to be a writer, and I want to like write stories, and like wrote stories at that age too. So always kind of loved storytelling, always loved that idea of like writing stories and that. So it's always kind of been there, I think.
So you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and what happens to you is what happens to a lot of us, including myself, is you find blades and you read it and you go, holy shit, like what is going on here? I don't know exactly what's going on. I know I like it. And I was a little bit like you, where it took me about 1.5 years to figure out what the hell is going on here, including some bad attempts at running it. For you, you explored more, you went on the Discord and stuff like that. If looking back on it, when do you think you finally got it? Like what broke through for you when you finally said, oh, now I think I understand blades? Do you remember what the breakthrough was?
I don't know if there was like a singular moment, but it was sometime in 2020, definitely. Probably around, I want to say like April or May of that year. So
you have a hell of a memory, right?
I mean, like, I'm basing it off of shutdown was March, right? So so we shut down in March, and I think at that point, I had already been like really digging into it. I'll say that it's when I started actually like playing Blades games that other people were GMing. Because I think that's really the accelerator, and that's what I was missing, because I was trying to understand it from this like intellectual perspective, this sort of like, oh, let me figure out the rules, and I knew instinctively, even as early as like 2015 or so, that would be very difficult without playing the game, and I knew that like playing led to understanding much quicker than anything else. But the problem was it just wasn't accessible to me at the time. There just wasn't anybody running it at the time. So I think playing, and I didn't necessarily play in Blades either. I played in hacks of Blades. So a bunch of people, that were hacking games. I think the first kind of campaign I played in was a game called Mothlight by a designer named Justin Ford. Goes by Dissonance on Discord and online. And I played in that campaign, and that was with a bunch of other Blades hackers from the forums, from the Discord. And then after we did like a mini, I think six session campaign, we ended up rotating. So then Michael Elliott, Socrates Online, who developed this game called Neon Black, this cyberpunk game, then ran another six sessions of that. And I think like somewhere in playing that second mini campaign, I felt pretty comfortable with the rules, and like things had begun like clicking, and also like discussing Blades like almost every day, right? Like literally, like I like to joke and that like we really got like a PhD in Blades like at the time, because like really we were so like everybody on the Discord at that time hacking that game was so into it, and everyone was approaching it from the same place, right? Because it is a dense book. It is a clockwork system, and there are so many moving parts that affect all of the other parts that like it's very difficult to understand it from like a holistic perspective. But
could not agree more.
Yeah, but I will say that like of that cohort of designers, I think everybody like, and you know, I'm including Mikey and M and Emmanuel and all the people that were like kind of really active around that time. Like we all ended up understanding Blades like intimately
Right.
by the end of it. So like I can speak like pretty confidently about like the experience of running Blades and like the various directions you can take and all of the moving parts. And it's very funny because, you know, people are still hacking that game today, and the people who come into the Discord these days and come into the community hacking it, it's like they're at that same starting point, right? And it's like, yeah, you have a long way to go to, but it's very rewarding too, because I think like having Blades as the basis of like my tabletop design, like my RPG knowledge, it's like it's a really good education. Like it prepared me or like taught me in a way that like I'm very grateful for, because it's like, so I don't know, just all of the concepts that are like layered within there. I feel like very confident in my design skills or in my understanding of how tabletop role-playing games work because of you know, the work put in to understand that system.
So you guys are running Mythworks, and with comics as the focus, you're going into your second crowdfunding. How and when does Wildsea come across your bow?
Yes, so it comes across my bow, I think around April, around that time too, April of 2020. So I am chronically online, as I always am, but especially then because it's the pandemic and you know it's everyone's online at the time, and I am just on top of everything indie RPGs at that point. So I am on all the websites, I am on all the subreddits, I'm literally scanning the feeds every single day to see what's out there. And at the time, there was subreddit drama. There was subreddit drama between the mods of RPG design over something that someone disagreed with, and I don't quite remember the details now. But then they started a separate subreddit called RPG Creation. And so I was lurking around there, and I saw this post from a designer posting a game called the Wildsea, asking for playtesters. And at the time, this was a brand new subreddit. This was maybe, you know, at the time, like maybe 2,000 subscribers. And he had like 26 comments on this post. And I was like, whoa, what is going on here? Because usually when you ask for playtesters, it's crickets, right? It's one of the hardest things. It's why you have to, you know, engage in community and network with people, because that's the only way to get people to, you know, play test your games. So this guy, he had 26 people respond saying, hey, I want to play this game. So I was like, whoa, what is this? I clicked in, you know, I download the quick start rules, and it, you know, it's this beautiful black and white like kind of quick start, and it looks really great. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I read the rules, and I'm like, oh, it's basically Blades, or it's using a Blades chassis for the resolution system. So that kind of caught my eye. Didn't think anything of it, kind of closed it, and then I think a day or two later was like, you know what, let me sign up for a playtest. I signed up for a playtest, got into a game. It was a very, very fun game. It was me, Felix, and another player, and you know, I immediately sort of derailed him, or like, you know, Felix is like, oh, the captain wants you to do this, and I'm like, I don't want to do that, I want to do this, and you know, Felix is like, okay, and he rolls with the punches. So you know, really great GM. Felix had a really fun time. And then that was a really good game. Didn't think much of it, but a couple days later, he DMs me on Discord, and he actually goes, "Oh, are you you're Ray Chou, like who created Glow, the comic?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." He's like, "Oh, I really like Glow. I'm one of your backers. In fact, Glow is one of my inspirations for the Wildsea, especially with the language parts." And I was like, "Whoa,
holy shit!"
Yeah, holy shit, no way. And so he goes, "Well, do you mind if I, you know, pick your brain about some crowdfunding stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then I think I approached him, and eventually that conversation led to me asking him, "Was like, well, would you be open for maybe us like publishing it?" And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's have that conversation." And that's sort of how that kind of kicked off.
And very successful, right? Especially coming from somebody who was not super published, not super out there. I know that they had a big community that they had gathered. I mean, the 26 posts on the subreddit, you know, shows their ability to draw people in. when you're sitting down to do a Kickstarter and for crowdfunding, this was not your first one. It sounds like are very organized in that process. We have business plans. We have, layers in which we're going to work through. Did Wildsea surprise you? Did it do what you thought it would? What was that experience of crowdfunding Wildsea?
It definitely surprised us. I think my biggest crowdfunder up until then was around like $28,000, which was like a good bit of money. But the first Wildsea campaign did, I think, 135. So it was a different level, a jump up. And yeah, I think we were pretty fortunate in that, like, obviously it's a great game, and it draws people at the post asking for playtesters as you saw. But I sort of gave it my all with that one too, in terms of like producing it and like put all my experience in. Got my kind of comic fan base to like transfer over to a large extent as well. So that helped it as well. And I think those were like nice contributing factors, and also the timing of it, because we were launching during the pandemic, while that Kickstarter was happening. That Discord for the game grew tremendously during that time, and a lot of people were running games, including Rick, who works for Mythworks now. He was running like a game a day during that time, because he was recently furloughed or whatever from his job, but with government assistance. So he's like, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna run this game that I love a lot, and I'm gonna run it every single day. So we just had a lot of people who had time for RPGs, or were rediscovering RPGs, or discovering RPGs for the first time, hanging out online as all of us were back then, hopping into this Discord for this like exciting game and spending a lot of their time playing and running the game. So I think we were very fortunate in that way, where we were able to sort of build that community really, really quickly because of the timing and circumstances.
Now, with the success of that, Ray, was there a decision with your partner to say, hey, that's where we're going to focus? We're going to kind of put comics to the side. We're going to focus on TTRPGs, or is Mythworks wide open on that? Like, did any business decisions happen after the success of Wildsea, I guess is my question.
Yes. So unfortunately, I will say it was not necessarily like a conversation, though it probably should have been. It was more of a this thing is now like the biggest thing that we're doing, and necessitates sort of like the attention that it needs. And we did do a couple of big ones afterwards. We did, like, for comics, like we did the Collected for Skies and Glow. But really, like, the TTRPG stuff sort of like had a gravity of its own. And because it was like a new project and it needed like attention in terms of like getting it over the finish line, and because it was like our first TTRPG product, we really wanted to make sure that, we gave it everything we had. And like we've been trying to balance the two of them, but we haven't been doing a very, very good job of it, to be honest. And that is one of the things that I wish I was a little better at, or have been a little bit better at. Actually, like as of today, like 2026, like we're putting a lot more energy back into our comic projects, and we're really refocusing on them. We just got a deal for book distribution through Lakeside Distribution. So our comics should be at big box retailers and stuff like that, Barnes and Nobles, by the end of the year. And so we're hoping that really kind of like spurs us on and like kind of allows us to sort of like push in that direction, but also just more being able to expand the team a little bit, bring on more sort of like producers / Kickstarter, like people that are in charge of the crowdfunding campaigns. Because like a big lesson, I guess, over the last couple of years, especially after the Quinn's Quest review, was really how to run the business, right? Because up until then, it was basically me and my buddy Vince from film school, and like, I have this like producing background, but we're kind of just bootstrapping everything, just sort of like, going from project to project, doing the crowdfunder thing, and then essentially figuring it out afterwards. But like after the Quinn's Quest thing, that was the first time we had enough funds, but also needed to hire other people to bring on board to try to meet demand. And then that necessitated like, well, okay, how do you have employees and how do you like work in a team and like manage that? So that's been a lot of the learning over the last, I would say like 2 to 3 years. But now I think we have a much better handle of those aspects of it. And because we have a better handle of it, one of my big things especially was learning how to like let go a little bit and like delegate a little bit more. And so like I think I'm a little bit better at that now, have a lot more help, and hopefully can be a lot more consistent, because that's the main thing, right? Like crowdfunding always comes down to and anything really comes down to two things. It's communication and consistency. So those unfortunately haven't necessarily been some of the things that we've been like on top of as we've grown, where it's like, oh, like, you know, I'm like, we're always working on things behind the scenes, but like, you know, we can maybe be better at communicating, maybe be better at being like more consistent at it. So like we're trying to focus and we're being more consistent now. But I know it's going to take a little bit of time. Like, also, we're a much larger entity now than we were, say, in like 2020. So like, I'm noticing that internally, like, if we see a really, really positive change in the way that we're running things, it won't necessarily like show in public until like 6 months down the line, right? So it's kind of like that slower turning boat now. But yeah, we're still doing comics. And long story short,
pretty amazing. So you tipped off my next line of questions is Quinn's Quest. Quinn's has been on the show. I've been a fan of his since the board game days and the computer games. Like, good dude. When did you get a hint that like Quinn's was sniffing around Wildsea, or did like I know the review didn't just drop and then you guys didn't know. Like, can you give me an idea of what that little period of time looked like before he actually put the review out? Yeah,
it was about 3 or 4 months out, I think, from when he actually dropped it. So I think like 4 months out. Felix comes up to he reached out to Felix and Felix goes, hey, there's this reviewer named Quinn's who wants to launch a YouTube channel, and like and I think he's done stuff like this before. And I kind of was like usually in that relationship, Felix is kind of like, I'm just gonna put my head down and like make the games, and I'm the person who's like, you know who that is, or like, this is so and so. And I was like, Quinn's from Shut Up and Sit Down. He's like, yeah, I think so. I was like, oh, okay, that could be really big. So like we send him the review copy, and I think and you know, like, didn't think much of it, or like, okay, this is coming sometime down the line. And I think like 1 month before, that's like when we kind of where Felix goes, hey, I think Quinn's is like nearly about to launch the channel and whatnot, so you know, just a heads up. And we're like, okay. And even then, like, I don't think we had like an idea of what that really meant. And also, I want to shout out another creator here, Dave Thomavor. So Dave was the first one who gave us any sort of coverage, and he did so when we were doing the expansion.
Dave's
for
good about that.
Yeah, he's
really good about that.
Yeah. So he gave us a review of Wildsea during the Storm and Root campaign, and that was pretty massive too, because we had the Kickstarter campaign at the time. We pretty much could directly track the impact of that review, right? So like you could very clearly see a massive spike when that review launched, and that sort of like was the first time we had any sort of like social media influencer review, stuff like that, and that kind of like put us on a map in some small way. And I wouldn't be surprised. I've never confirmed with Quinn's like how he actually got onto our radar, but you know, typically with these things, like you said, right? I like realized I had like, you know, 6 or 7 of your things before I realized. So I wondered, like, it's such a nebulous thing, marketing. It's like, you know, you have these metrics and analytics that you can look at, but they're never quite representative of what is actually happening. And it's this like networking effect, right, where you're like, you're trying to figure out how things link together, and like I talk a lot about, or I conceptualize it in like multiple touch points, where like you don't want, like, if you're only seeing like the Wildsea, for instance, on like Facebook or Meta ads, right? Like, you're probably like curious, but you know, it's going to be really hard for you to be like, oh, this is something I want. But if you see the ad and then you see, you know, people talking about it on like a subreddit, and then you see a review of it, then all of a sudden you're like, all right, that's it, I gotta get this thing, right? Like
So true.
that's kind of like how it happens. And even like with influencers, reviewers, it's like the same process of them, like, you know, like figuring, like learning about stuff. So it's kind of interesting, the whole like social or like advertising media stuff. But anyway, so back to the question. We learned about it like a month out, and again, it was like we knew it was going to be big, but like nothing really could prepare us for like, you know, what happened.
The channel didn't even exist yet, right? Like nobody knew whether, I mean, now it's obvious that he made the jump and is a huge success in the next thing that he did. But at the time you're talking about, that could have been the biggest flop ever. We just didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, very true, very true. So we're very fortunate. And, you know, he did the Slugblaster review too, which was like his game of the year of that season. And that was really cool. And like shortly after Felix mentioned it to me, I think like Mikey mentioned, like it was pretty close, where he was like, hey, this guy named Quinn's reached out. And like I was like, oh, cool, that's great. And then like halfway through the season, you know, Quinn's reached out to me and was like, hey, like, can I get a copy of CBR plus B&K so I can run like Sleeper Citizen? So I was like, okay, cool. So it was like he kind of reviewed like all 3 of the games we had out at the time, right? Or like gave coverage to them. So I was like, sweet, like clearly,
Appreciate
like
it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
I forgot about the CBRPNK shout out as well. That's funny.
Yeah.
Didn't even make that connection.
Yeah. So I was like, I think he, like, he must have very similar tastes, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, I've only talked to, he's been on the show, and I've only talked to him briefly, and he and I exchange emails every once in a while. So it's I don't want to pretend that I know anything about it, but he seems to be like, he and I talk a good bit about Blades when we talked, and he seems to kind of get it.
Right.
And I think that that balance of mechanics and narrative is something that he finds very attractive, which aligns with me too, right? Which is a lot of times when I see Quinn's talk about a game, I'm like, I need to check that game out because I think I have similar taste to him as well.
Right.
So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We're going to do that some more with Ray when we talk about Now What and how does Mythworks go through its decision-making process. We'll be right back.
Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast. Connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights. For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the third floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice.
So, Ray, you're not the first publisher that I've talked to on the show. And one thing that I find very interesting is when you're responsible in a financial sense of saying, this is a project that we're going to spend the time and the effort and the money on in order to hopefully get a return at the end, right? And I'm not taking away the part of the passion and the love and things like that. But the bottom line is that you got to put a roof over your head. You've got people now that you have to pay. And there's a certain sense of responsibility. As games come to you or as you seek games out, what is that process like? And maybe if you want to pick a specific game where you went through this process to help walk us through it, but I'd love to get a sense of the mentality that you go through as you sift through and decide that is what I want Mythworks to put out next.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe a good way to walk it through is with Breathless Frightmare Edition, because it's it's on crowdfunding. As we got a couple days left, and
speaking of John Harper,
speaking of John Harper, thank you, dark blessings, Lord Harper. Thank you so much. Really, like he did us
that was so cool.
Yeah, that was so cool.
Awesome. So for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with it, RP's been on the show. In fact, RP was on talking about Breathless. Everybody knows that I think the world of him as a human and as a designer, and I think Breathless, I've run Galen's hack of Breathless, the facility, and really was found it really attractive. And then, RP's telling me about bringing it to my favorite genre, which is horror. I'm like, holy crap, this thing is going to be incredible. I get a couple peeks at it. RP and I talk about it, and then I see it out there funding, and I'm like, this thing hasn't funded yet. Like it's blowing my mind because on top of that, we've got Jack Panic from DNGN on there, who I think is another up and rising talent that literally came out of nowhere and now has taken over my PDF shelf of games because I've pretty much bought everything that they've produced. And I don't know, as the time of the recording was not less than a week ago, John posted a cover of something that does not exist, which is a supplement for the Nightmare edition of Breathless, but tied to Duskfall, and said, I'm basically putting a stretch goal in here that if this thing funds, I will make it. And then that pushed them over the line, which I think is really cool. But yes, so let's talk about you encountering RP and Breathless and how that came about.
Yeah. So I had an intern a couple of years ago named Rox, and Rox was this really bright high school student that was a early playtester of the Wildsea. And Rox was friends with another really bright high schooler named Liam, and the two of them together did the official Wildsea soundtrack. A pair of musicians. No Rox kidding. Is a bit as a more of a digital musician, and then Liam's a little bit more traditional. So they had like very kind of different takes on the Wildsea sounds. But in addition to that, Rox created the first version of the virtual play sheet for the Wildsea, which is what a lot of people use to run that game, because there's like thousands of character options for that game. So she programmed that, and I essentially like took that first version and like expanded on it to build the second version, and we've been using it ever since. So that whole code is based off of like what she produced. So I knew that Rox was, involved in this project, and I was like, wow, this person's really talented. She can do a whole lot. Like, she's really great with music. She's great with like programming and all of this stuff. And then I found out that she got into USC, which is in LA, and she got into their basically their interactive arts, their one of their film school programs, but it's more on the digital side. So I was like, great, and I kind of made an open offer. I was like, if you ever want to intern, since you're out here in LA now, like please come out. And she took me up on the offer a couple of summers ago. So she was coming in like 2-3 times a week. We would hang out. That would have them do some stuff for me. And one of the tasks that I put her to was like, okay, we're looking for other stuff to populate our web store. So like, why don't you give me a list of like 5 to 10 games that you think are really cool and like pitch them to me about it. And one of the things that she came up with, or her number one recommendation, was Stoneburner by Renee Pierre. Yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. And this looks cool. We picked it up. It did really well on our web store. I read it and I was like, the rules for this are actually really, really cool. Like really, really, really cool. And the more I read it, the more I liked what I was reading. So I ran it a couple of times, and I ran Breathless a couple of times. I looked into the, it being from Breathless, and I thought, well, this is cool. It's like a very simple, like core pamphlet kind of thing.
What was cool about it for you, Ray? So you've got this Blade's mind, right, with it, that all these interlocking things, and there's echoes of that in Breathless, where it's one of those things where you read it and you go, oh, okay, this seems really simple, but you play it and you realize just how much of a gear work that Breathless is as well. What clicked for you running Stoneburner?
Definitely, it was a couple of things. First, there was a defined cycle of play. I thought that was really cool, where it's like, okay, you're going out and then you're getting sort of loot, and you're coming back and you're building your base. And so I really like games with a defined cycle of play. And I think as far as like TTRPGs go, I know it existed before, but Blades really codified that, right?
100%.
So that was kind of cool to see echoes of that. I really like the step die. I thought that was a really, really brilliant way to simulate or echo that kind of genre that you're going for, right? And gives you a very, very different feel of game. And I like that. I like, don't get me wrong, I love my PBTA, I love my Forge in the Dark, but I really like it when they come up with like novel systems that exist for a reason, right? For like a genre reason, or do something different. So I thought that was really, really cool. And then I also really liked their take in Stoneburner on position and effect. And position and effect, I go back and forth on. I'm like, sometimes I'm like, do you need it? Do you not need it? Like, and sometimes I'm like, I like it. Sometimes I like it, don't. But I like the step die ladder, where it's like, okay, you can step up one die, and then if you step up two, it's not 2 steps up, instead you get advantage, right? And then or disadvantage. So I was like, okay, that's a really cool way to incorporate a lot of different mechanics that have been, released or pioneered over the last 10 years into like one sort of elegant thing. You have position effect in there, you have advantage and disadvantage. It's probably the best D&D rule of the last 10 years or so. And then you have, like the step die that Renee Pierre came up with as well. So I thought like, I thought just mechanically like, wow, it's doing some really, really cool things. And it was sitting in that sweet spot too that I like, where it's like, Renee calls it like rules bright, but it's that sort of like the special abilities are still very like fiction first, and very like like large and fictional permissions. So there was a lot of stuff that I really, really liked, and the more I read it, the more I loved it. And then also the influence of like OSR and the tables used to sort of generate the scenarios. And I could just go on and on about Stoneburner once you get me going.
Good.
The zone generation I think is brilliant, where you just throw a bunch of dice, right? And you're like, oh, that's what the region looks like. I mean, that's so cool. That's such good system support for something, right? And it's like, you don't really even need like pages and pages of lore. You just have like strong generators, and you can come up with it yourself. And then the oracles, the solo TTRPGs. I love the solo TTRPGs. So when I read it, I was like, okay, that's immediately Mythic emulator, right? Where it has like echoes of that, with the yes/no question. But then to support it with the seeds and the other oracles. So I ran that with Vince, my partner, and that's a lot of times that's how we play test games and how we vet things. So we did the same thing with like Slugblaster, and he loved it. So I was like, great, this is a win. We did it for Wildsea, and then for Stoneburner we ran a duo game of Stoneburner, where we came up with a couple characters, but then we kind of took turns or came up with the GM consequences ourselves, and we used the oracles, and we found it so incredibly intuitive and fruitful for generating stuff that we were like, wow, this is like really, really solid in terms of that system. And I liked it so much that like I pushed heavily for Eternal Ruins, another game that we're publishing. I was like, I want RP to do the solo rules. Like, he's got to do the solo rules for that game. That was like one of my only kind of stipulations as publisher. I was like, that's got to happen. So yeah, there's a lot. Like I just love where RP's mind is in terms of in terms of like RPG design. I had like a long thread about it in Blue Sky too, but like I really think that, you know, in the past couple of years, it's been all about like OSR and story games in terms of like the indie TTRPG stuff. But I'm seeing with RP, with guys like Spencer Campbell, with a handful of other guys like Binary Star, and like I'll throw M in that category as well, where they're sort of like being inspired by like both of these schools, and they're kind of like coming up with stuff that is like unique, that is neither here nor there, but inspired by both. And I think one of the cores too is like looking at video games and being inspired by like the artifice of those mechanics and like bringing them back into the tabletop RPG realm.
Yeah, it's amazing because the call out you made, like I'll talk about Spencer Campbell. I mean, one of the things that Spence is doing is really pulling from video games, right, and porting him into that experience of having it as a game itself. And I've never really thought about it that way. And I like how you put it, Ray, where it's not OSR, it's not narrative storytelling game. It's somewhere in between there, and it's become its own thing that echoes to both, right? So an OSR person can come into Stoneburner and go, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. There's some other funny stuff going on, but okay. And then a story game person could come into something like Stoneburner and go, this all makes sense to me. This little part here, which is the OSR echoes there, that's interesting and familiar, but that's a really good call out. So Stoneburner, love it. RP's going to do right the solo rules for this other game. Where does the Frightmare edition come up?
Right. So Frightmare Edition, back to your original question, right? How does this happen? How does it become a Mythworks game?
Yeah.
So I just, I played Stoneburner, then I played Breathless, and I thought, this is really cool. I actually like how light and effective this is for a zombie survival game. At the same time, or maybe a little bit earlier, I'm playing in a play-by-post OSR game with Jack, with Dungeon Club.
Yeah.
Sketchy Vans module, and I'm doing that, and I'm having fun with that. That's how I get turned on to his work, and I'm admiring his work from afar for a couple of years, and I'm like, that's really cool. If I ever have a chance to work with them, I really want to work with them. And then I'm talking to Emmanuel, and we're talking about making more games in this format that we eventually called Story Pack, the CBRP&K format. And so, we have plans to do that, and it's a pretty flexible format. Essentially, it's just like 15 brochures in a box, right? And that folds in a specific way. So we're like, okay, what can we do with that? And it's kind of like where I come in is like, okay, like let's put all of these people together in the same room and see what happens. Let's bring RP with Jack, and we'll have Emmanuel advising on some of the more product design stuff. And we'll let them cook. And then like I kind of pitched it all to them, bring them in the same group chat, the same room, and I'm like, hey, what do you guys think about doing this? And like, what if it's sort of like a VHS, like a classic like 80s VHS horror box? And kind of just let them run with it from there, and figure out what it looks like. So that's how that came together. But the key bits of that story. So almost everything that we publish or produce has been kind of built through community. So in that story, it was Rox, right? Rox, who was part of the Wildsea community early on, became my intern, trusted their taste, brought that to me. I took it seriously and read it and was like, okay, this is cool. This aligns with my taste. Let's give it a chance, first as a online retailer, and then, like trying to publish some of the games, whatnot. And then with the Wildsea, Felix was connected to me. It was a blind connection. I blind play tested it, but later him coming back and saying that he was a fan of the Glow and it was an inspiration for Wildsea. That felt very serendipitous to me. So like bears exploring further. And then with Emmanuel and CBRP&K, at the time I was heavily involved in the Blades Discord, and when it came time for me to run a game in that playtest group I was talking about, I was playing Cyberpunk 2077 at the time. I was super into it. It was like the first time I really understood Cyberpunk as a genre, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And that's when Emmanuel dropped the original edition of CBR plus P&K. And I think I was like maybe the 7th person to buy that game on itch, and I was for sure the first person to make content, make a scenario for it. And I know this because Emmanuel has told me this. I didn't even know this, and he was lurking on the Blades Discord, and I was talking about the scenario that I wrote and ran for my friends basically, and I posted it, and that's how that connection was made. So, later when I talked to him, I think that warmed him up to the idea of being published by Mythworks, by me. And then M, met through the Blades in the Dark community. Mikey, same thing. He was running his original Slugblaster Kickstarter at the same time we were doing the Wildsea one, and I had been following Slugblaster for years and years before that, and talking to him online about Blade stuff. And we'd check in every once in a while, and then eventually he was like, oh dude, like I made the game, but like I don't think I ever want to self-publish anything again, or like it was tough. So I was like, well, maybe I can publish it, maybe we can do that. So that's how that conversation went. And then like my big contribution to that one again was like, Mikey, you had this tier for like a pizza box, and I got the pizza box, but how about if we actually made it like a cooler pizza box that like fit the game? And he was like, yeah, let's do that. And I was like, let's bring in Emmanuel to help us do that, right? So that's kind of like my contribution.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, just like bringing people together, but really it's the community aspect is really important. It has to align like with my taste, because I do have like games I like, games that like I admire, but maybe don't want to publish, or for various things. So like the taste has to be there. My lineage is from the Blade stuff or whatever.
Sure.
These days I'm craving a little bit more crunch, yada yada. So like it has to sort of align with that, with other members of my team or whatnot, if they bring me stuff. But it's the community aspect of it. And then it has to have a certain, like, I don't know, like a certain je ne sais quoi, like the Mythworks kind of quality, right? And that's more of a it when you see it type of thing. And I tell that with everyone, right? Like it's like when you're doing a Kickstarter, when you're doing a business plan, a prospectus or anything, like pretty much within the first minute or so, first 30 seconds, whether or not you dig something, right? It's that quick. It really is that quick. And it's a very binary decision. It's yes, I like this, I want this, or no, not for me. And you have all of these tools of analysis afterwards to, like where you can talk about it, where you're like, okay, was it the thumbnail? Was it like the images? Was it the trailer? Right?
Yep.
But that's all analysis, and analysis comes after the gut reaction, right? So I think a lot of times there is sort of like this gut reaction to thing. And what I will say too also is art really sells a game, but mechanics keep people around.
Yep.
And ideally a great game has both, right? So the art is the first thing that you can like really experience. And like when people ask for advice for pitching, this is what I tell them, right? It's like, you want to, like, if you really want to get picked up, or if you want to like make it like, fairly big, you want like a hit on crowdfunder, like you got to invest in art. You gotta like spend money to make a little bit money, because people are superficial like that. They're going to be judging it based off of that art.
It's how Wildsea got on my radar, is it was a fucking beautiful game.
Yeah.
Right. I remember coming across Wildsea for the first time. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but Jesus, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then I dig into it and realize, what it is from there. So I could not agree more as a consumer.
Yeah. So that's really important. But then but then if you want people to stick around, right, like that's when the mechanics really come into play, and that's what will determine whether they play your game for like a really, really long time. So it's like all of those factors, right? But usually, like, we do have an open submission policy. People can send us stuff, but so far, not saying that this will always be the case, but so far it has been through like a community, someone being like, hey, you should check this out, me being like put onto something, and then like kind of exploring on my own and determining like I really dig this, and going from there.
It's neat for me because you say it's a gut instinct, right? And there's different paths here, right? So is it a situation where Ray sees something and Ray likes it and it ends up becoming Mythworks? Or do you see something and go, I think the market would like this, which makes me like it? Like, where does that balance come in? And have you had situations where you've had games where you said, I like this game, but I just don't think it's the right fit, even though I like it so much? Does that make sense? I'm trying to get a sense of the two.
Totally, all the time. I think so. So first, it's like me and Vince. Like, Vince has to be on board with it, right? Like, both of us have to be like, okay, yeah, let's do this. But beyond that, it is, I think I'm pretty good about separating sort of like what, like, I have a good instinct, like back to the thing I said earlier, where pattern recognition, right? Where like I've always been kind of like early onto stuff. Sorry, that's my dog.
It's okay. I am too.
And so I've always like I think I have a good instinct about like what will work from a market perspective, and so like I definitely follow that gut quite a bit. But I am someone who like I love the super indie stuff, right? I love the zines, I love the DIY stuff, I love the little like itch lyric games, one pagers, and I will play those all day. You know, I still go to the Story Games LA meetups every once in a while, and then, you know, I'll go to our local con, Strategic Con, and I love seeing like what's in the cutting edges, the frontier of design. Right? Like what are the people, what are the kids coming up with these days, right? I love that stuff. But I do think that like with Wildsea specifically, like one of the reasons that I saw potential in Wildsea was because I thought it would be a very good bridge for more traditional players to be turned on to some of these, you know, more like at the time cutting edge indie fiction forward games. And I thought, like, you know, if you can catch them with something that is familiar but different but familiar enough where it's not so different, that I think it might just work. And I think that's been proven out to a certain extent, right? Like, you know, with Quinn's Quest and the people kind of getting onto it. So I kind of like that, and I think that's where Mythworks maybe is too, is that like we're definitely still like on the indie side of things, but like I think we try to bring forth some of the more like cutting edge avant-garde stuff and kind of put it a little bit more towards like the mainstream traditional land, or make it appealing to that audience as well.
Yeah, and I'm a consumer of what you make, right? And I'll blow a little smoke for you and Vincent here real quick. Every once in a while I see publishers come across that the publisher defines my interest in the game. An example of that is Evil Hat. Evil Hat I trust as a publisher, right? So if Evil Hat says this is a good game, it's gonna garner my attention. In very short time, Mythworks has done the same thing. Just because it's been game after game, the CBRPNK didn't even connect that it was the same people that put out Wildsea, right? But I picked that game up and I'm like, holy shit, it's them again. And how cool is this? So, you know, whatever you're doing, I think is working. At least for one guy who backs too many Kickstarters.
You and me both.
And I'm not doing a great time explaining it, but like Mythworks now is a house for me, where when I find out now that you guys are looking at something, you guys are producing something, that alone will get my attention. And there's only a handful of publishers that do that. So whatever you guys are doing here, it's working, at least for this guy. So, you know, hats off on that, man.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
It's a big deal. Not because it's a big deal to me. How about that? All right, guys, we're going to take one more break. We get back from this break, we're going to stop talking about the shit that Ray makes. We're going to find out what Ray consumes. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode.
So Ray, for me, my interviews tend to be kind of a bookend thing. I like to start off with figuring out who the hell you are and where you came from, because I think that informs what you end up creating as a creative. Then I like to end things figuring out what is it that you enjoy, right? What do you consume in the way you're hoping people consume what you're creating at Mythworks? So anything recently, Ray, for you that has been a game, a movie, an RPG, video game, Prestige TV, it's something that's just gotten its hooks into you and really caught your attention?
Yeah, let's see. I'm gonna have a really eclectic kind of mix of stuff here.
I expect no less.
So I'm gonna talk about a movie first that I saw recently, and this is I don't know how deep into sort of the TTRPG stuff specifically, but this really scratches my like love for art house films and whatnot. So I saw this film called Farewell My Concubine
Never
recently.
Heard of it.
So this is a 1993 film, a Chinese film about two young opera house trainees, and one of them is trained to play the role as the concubine to the other one's emperor for this famous play called Farewell My Concubine, and it is a film that explores themes of queerness, identity, Chinese history throughout the last century, the century of turmoil. So it starts with the fall of the Manchu dynasty, goes into the occupation of Japan, then it goes into the KMT, then the CCCP rule, and no one goes unscathed here. It's pretty damning for all of them. But it's like if you've ever been curious about Chinese history, it's a beautiful film, it's a touching film, it's a tragic film, but this is like 1993, right? So I saw this recently at a re-release at our house theater here in Los Angeles, and I was blown away. Like it moved me to tears, and it blew my mind that this a film dealing with these themes of queerness, of almost transness, like, was released in 1993, and just absolutely gorgeous film too. The cinematography is absolutely amazing. So that's the first thing that I want to throw out there. Farewell My Concubine. And then recently, I have been really enjoying the Vikings show. I'm a little bit late to that, but that's one that I'm.
It's a good show. I want to hear your take on it.
Yeah, so actually, I've been working on a game called Starfall myself, which is sort of like a space Viking game. So I've been doing a lot of research for it. So I've been reading the Saga of the Icelanders, the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda, and then now watching Vikings. So it's sort of like been soaking into that culture and sort of like understanding like these themes of Ragnarok and like what it means. So I've just been really enjoying it, and it's been a while since I've like gotten into like a prestige TV show. So right. I'm like on the first episode of season 2 now, so I'm liking it. It's
early.
Yeah, I'm so early, but it's good because, like, you know, I'm probably with a lot of people like battling the whole brain rot thing, right? So like yep. I'm trying desperately to like engage in other long forms of media and not just like doom scroll all day. So Amen. So far it's been strong enough to like hold my attention in that regard.
Yeah, guys, I hadn't thought about this show in a long time, but it's a show that won me over. When I first started watching it, it was a little too manosphere for me, of, you know, heavy testosterone, which is, there's nothing wrong with it unless that's all you are. But the acting was good enough, and the writing was pretty good that it kept me in there. What's interesting, and I bet you're starting to see it in season 2, is how the show matures. And starts really talking about masculinity in a very interesting way, and talking about gender balance and the tragedy of expectations for both men and women. Like, you're getting into some interesting shit. I feel like for that show, a lot of people talk about like, oh, it was great at the beginning, kind of went downhill. For me, it was just the opposite. It was very good at the beginning, then it got really good because it also starts talking about issues of fathers and father-son relationships and father-daughter relationships. So, man, you're in for a treat. I'm excited for you.
That's great.
Show.
Yeah, very similarly too. I think I tried to get into it like years and years ago, and I maybe gave like the first episode or so a shot and was like, yeah, I'll pass, right? But sort of getting back into it recently, so that's been really nice. And yeah, like similarly to that, I'm looking forward to, so I'm actually seeing Wardruna, the Norse sort of like pagan folk band in person. I'm going to Norway this summer to go check it out.
Full immersion, right?
Yeah. I gotta get that research in. So that's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, and that's sort of been me recently, media-wise. What about you, Craig? What have you been getting into?
So, and it's really funny because my pick here was not on purpose, but understanding your background as a storyteller, especially, from a script standpoint, I think this one is interesting, and I don't know if you've seen it. Have you watched on HBO DTF St. Louis?
No, I haven't.
So it's Jason Bateman, David Harbour, and I kept seeing it. The little tagline for it didn't really interest me. And DTF, if you're not familiar, Down to Fuck St. Louis, it's an app, right? And I just watched the first episode.
Okay.
And it's an hour long. And when the episode finished, I was like, okay, like I get this. Like the pace of it was neat. It had a little bit of a Curb Your Enthusiasm type pace to it, where it kind of took its time and let relationships linger. There's some very obvious script cadence involved here. But I watched the first episode and I was like, well, what's left? Because what happens in the first episode, right, is it shows, here's the introduction to the characters, here's the conflict, here's the resolution. The end of the first episode, you know everything that's happened. So I'm sitting here going, well, what the fuck's episode 2 going to be? And what they do is every episode fills in the spaces in between the scenes that you've already watched in the first episode, which creates a whole new context of things you saw in episode 1. And then in episode 4, you got a new context for something you learned in episode 3. And it was this weird, like accordion story that was opened up where I knew the beginning and the end, but had no idea what was happening in the middle, even though when I thought I did, it made sense. And I've never seen that done before. And I'm sure it has been, right? It's just the first time I've encountered it, but it was really, really interesting. And on top of that, the script is really strong. The cinematography is really, really, it's very artsy in a lot of ways, but not in moments that, you can tell it's on purpose, right? And as a script writer, you'll recognize this too if you get a chance to watch it, Ray. There's a very interesting cadence to how the characters talk to each other and whatnot. But I watched the whole thing with my wife. My wife really wasn't into it. My wife struggles with cringe. Like Curb Your Enthusiasm is a good example of it. It just doesn't like those cringy moments. The Office, and there's some of that in this as well, because obviously because it has Bateman in it, you're guaranteed that's going to happen. But I really enjoyed it, and I don't necessarily think it's great, but what it was for me is something I'd never seen before, and it was also really, really good. So my recommendation for people is watch the first episode, DTF St. Louis. If you are like curious like I was after that, I think you'll love the show. If you watch that first episode and go, then you may not bother. But
for sure.
And Ray, if at some point you end up watching this, I want you to send me a message, because I would be very interested to learn from somebody who's written scripts whether this was interesting as I thought it was, or if you're like, Craig, this has been done like 10 million times. I don't know why you're so excited about this stupid show. So if you do watch it, you'll have homework. You'll have to let me know what you thought.
Definitely will do. Just off the bat, it kind of reminds me of a take or a variation of like a Rashomon, like kind of like where it's different.
I don't know what that means.
Oh, have you seen Rashomon by?
No.
Okay, so that'll be my third pick. Rashomon.
Let's do it.
Akira Kurosawa. So let me. It's a take on a Shakespeare. It's a take on King Lear.
Okay.
I think it's a take on King Lear. Don't quote me on that. I don't want people to come after me. But it's essentially
three people listening, right? You're okay.
It's So it is it's Akira Kurosawa, who's the legendary Japanese director who did Seven Samurai, and essentially it is a movie told in the same story told from different perspectives. So each act is like perspective of this person and another person, this person. So like you kind of get the full picture after 2 or 3 times through.
Yeah, and rumor has it he's pretty good at what he does, so it might be worth my attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll never forget the first time, because I saw Magnificent Seven first, right? But
Right.
I'll never forget watching Seven Samurai for the first time. And that was a similar experience for me where I finished watching, I'm like, I'm not sure what I just saw. All I know is I really, really liked it, and I think I'm going to watch it again. And it's one of those movies that I immediately watched a second time, even though I watched one of its children long before it. Boy, oh boy, I tell you what, there's a lot of things to do on a Friday afternoon, Ray, including sitting down and telling me if DTF St. Louis was a good pick or a bad pick. But you decided to spend it with me, and I really appreciate that.
For sure. Thanks so much, Craig. Appreciate your time.
And for those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You made it, and I appreciate you listening. And save some spoons and take care of yourself. And if you have a few extra, take care of somebody else. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.